My name is Asia Rutledge. Everyone calls me Casey, and I'm 31 years old. 7 days after a delivery truck ran a red light and folded my car around a guardrail like a soda can, my mother finally walked into my hospital room. What she found was an empty bed, hospital corners still tucked, and a single folded note sitting dead center on the pillow, exactly where my head should have been. By then, I already knew about the 3 phone calls. I knew that while a trauma surgeon was telling my mother that tonight might be my last, she was standing in a bridal boutique answering, "We're busy, her sister needs us more right now." I knew my sister never picked up the phone at all, not once, not for me. I knew my father was 9,000 miles away in Singapore, cheerfully believing a story that had been built for him, brick by brick, the way you build something you don't want inspected too closely. But here's what none of them knew yet. That note on the pillow wasn't the ending of anything. It was the first domino. What I found in the weeks that followed didn't just break my family apart, it explained, down to the blood in our veins, why that family was never fully mine to begin with. Welcome back to Behind Closed Doors, Revenge, where quiet people finally say the things that took years to say, and families learn what presence actually means. If stories like this tend to find you at exactly the right time, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Stay until the end, because what my mother did after my father's plane landed took even me by surprise, and I'm the one who wrote the note that started it. 2 weeks before the accident, my life ran on a schedule that wasn't mine, and I didn't notice, because I'd never known any other kind. I'm a nurse. 8 years on the med-surg floor at St. Bridget Regional, 12-hour shifts that start before the sun and end in the blue hour when the whole world looks bruised. On the way home I'd swing by the pharmacy for my mother's blood pressure refill, because I was already out anyway. I stocked her weekly pill organizer every Sunday. I taped a color-coded medication calendar to my parents' refrigerator, and my mother thanked me the way you'd thank a delivery driver who got the order right, pleasant, brief, already thinking about the next thing. I had my own life. Technically. A 1-bedroom walk-up above a dry cleaner's. I paid my own rent, on time, out of a job I was good at. I owned one houseplant, a pothose that had survived 3 moves purely out of spite. I had the outline of an adult life. But the color inside that outline belonged to the family group chat, and that spring, the group chat had exactly one subject. My sister Madison's wedding. Dress fittings. Cake tastings. A 3-day crisis over whether the napkins should be champagne or ivory. Somewhere in the middle of that, Biscuit, Madison's French bulldog, tore a ligament at the dog park, and the group chat treated it like a heart transplant. Prayer hands emojis. A GoFundMe considered and abandoned only because Madison's fiancé offered to just pay for the surgery outright, which somehow became the most romantic thing anyone had ever heard. My father was the only one who ever changed the subject, and only because he couldn't participate in the rest. He was in Singapore for 5 weeks installing a packaging line for the company he'd given half his life to. Every call started the same way. Not hello. How's my girl? He only ever meant me, and nobody ever corrected him, including me. The week before he flew out, I helped him dig through his study for his passport. We went through a junk drawer together, rubber bands gone brittle, a fistful of laminated church blood drive pins going back 20 years. My dad donates blood the way other men golf, competitively, proudly, with statistics he can recite. I laughed at the pins, shut the drawer, and thought nothing of it. If I had looked 1 inch closer that day, this whole story might have started 5 years sooner. I think about that a lot now. How close I came to the truth with my hand literally resting on top of it. That Tuesday, I clocked out at 7, tired the bone-deep way only a double shift can make you. I texted my mother that her prescription was in my bag, that I'd drop it Wednesday. I never made it home. The intersection at Route 9 and Callahan has a long light and an even shorter temper. I had the green. A box truck making a late delivery run decided the red didn't apply to him, and 40 miles an hour of steel met my driver's side door like it had been waiting for me specifically. I remember the sound more than the impact. A giant can opener working fast, tearing metal in one long, ugly note. Then ceiling tiles sliding past overhead, a voice I knew from the break room, saying my name like a question, like she couldn't quite believe the woman on the board matched the name on the chart. They brought me to my own emergency room. There is a very particular embarrassment in bleeding on people you eat lunch with. I drifted in and out while the trauma team ran what felt like the entire alphabet on me. The words I caught weren't good ones. Pressure's dropping. Belly's filling. Somewhere in there, my spleen had torn quietly open and was pouring my own blood supply into places it was never meant to go. Nobody needed my permission to fix any of it. When you roll into a trauma bay unconscious and dying, consent is implied, the law assumes, reasonably, that you'd like to keep living. But there's a separate protocol for family. Someone pulls your emergency contact and makes the call, so the people who love you can get in a car and come. Mine had been on file with Human Resources since my very first day, unchanged for 8 years, Lorraine Rutledge. Mother. I used to think of that line on the intake form as a formality. A box you fill in once and forget about, like your middle name or your blood type before you ever need to know it. I know better now. That line isn't paperwork. It's a bet you place on a person years in advance, payable in full on the single worst night of your life. They wheeled me toward the operating room a little after 9. My blood pressure had stopped being a number and started being a suggestion. Somewhere above me, at the nurse's station, a phone was already ringing. I wasn't awake for any of what happened next. I've pieced it together since, in fragments, from the one person who was on the other end of that phone, Nora Feeney, charge nurse, my best friend of 9 years, the woman who dialed my mother's number 3 separate times in a single night. The first call went out around 8:45. Nora kept her voice in that steady, clinical register we're all trained to use. Your daughter's been in a serious accident. She's unconscious. She's going into emergency surgery. You should come now. My mother didn't ask which hospital. She didn't ask if I was going to live. There was a pause, Nora told me later, with boutique music playing faintly behind it. And then, we're busy. Her sister needs us more right now. Then she asked to be kept posted. The exact way you track a package. The second call came directly from the trauma surgeon, before they opened me up, because the numbers were ugly and he believed, old-fashioned, decent man, in giving families the truth straight, no matter how it landed. He got the same wall. The third call was Nora again, a little after 11, when I was out of surgery but nowhere near out of the woods. My pressure was still sliding. More blood going in than staying put. She said the words nurses only say when we mean them completely, the ones that skip past every softening phrase we're trained to use. If there's family who wants to be here, tonight might be her last. My mother's answer, in full, keep us posted. Nora also tried Madison, 3 times. Straight to voicemail every time. A text came back half an hour later, and I have read it so many times since that I could recite it in my sleep. At the emergency vet with Biscuit, Mom's handling it. Somewhere across town, my mother was handling it from the good chairs at a bridal boutique, and my sister was holding a French bulldog's paw while a veterinary tech wrapped a torn ligament in gauze. I was 31 years old, and my next of kin had put me on hold. Nobody came. Not that night. Not the next day. I woke up on day 3, minus a spleen, with a breathing tube fresh out of my throat and a voice like a rusted hinge. Waking up in the ICU is nothing like the movies. It's slow and stupid and humiliating, and a nurse I'd personally trained 2 years ago kindly pretended not to notice me crying for no identifiable reason. I did my own inventory, because of course I did. Splenectomy. 3 broken ribs on the left. A fractured wrist, splinted and useless. A concussion that made the ceiling swim if I turned my head too fast. My phone had died at the scene, crushed along with most of the driver's side of my car. So I lay there, wired to a monitor I could read better than most people read a menu, watching my own numbers instead of asking anybody how I was doing. Old habit. Nurses make terrible patients. Across the hall, an elderly man's family had organized themselves into shifts: daughter in the morning, son at lunch, grandkids through the evening, like they'd built an actual schedule for it. I knew that schedule. I'd built it for 100 other families over 8 years. Nobody had built one for me. On day 4, they moved me to step down. My own floor. My own unit. A bed I had probably made with my own hands at some point in the last 8 years. I asked Nora the question I'd been circling since the tube came out, the one I'd been almost too scared to ask out loud. Did anyone call back? Nora is the kind of friend who will not lie to you, which is exactly why she looked at the 4 pump instead of my face. The real answer came the next morning, with 2 coffees and the particular expression she saves for delivering bad news to a patient's family, an expression I had never once seen turned on me. She pulled the visitor chair up to my bed, set the coffees down, and gave it to me the way I'd have wanted it. Straight, in order, no anesthesia. The first call and the boutique music. The surgeon's call and the wall he hit. 11 p.m. and the sentence that ends with "tonight might be her last," and the answer that was shorter than a goodbye. Keep us posted. I asked her to repeat it twice. Both times, her voice did the same small flinch on the word posted, like it cost her something to say it out loud a second time. Then I did something I don't fully regret, and don't fully forgive myself for either. I borrowed her phone and opened Madison's Instagram, public, because of course it is. There it all was, bright filtered light that makes every ordinary life look like a commercial. My sister in a fitting room mirror, satin and lace, a champagne flute raised at an angle clearly chosen for the photo. My mother beside her, holding the veil up like a newborn. The post was timestamped the same evening a surgeon was telling her that her other daughter might not see morning. The next day's post, biscuit in a little plastic cone, one bandaged leg propped on a pillow. Our brave boy paw prints. My mother in the background of that one too, cradling the dog like he was the one who'd nearly died. I sat with the phone on my blanket for a long moment. I didn't yell. There's a switch that flips in medical people during a code: hands stay busy, voice stays flat, feelings get filed for a later that never quite arrives. It flipped. I drank the entire cup of water on my tray, set the phone face down on the blanket, and said the only thing I had in me. Okay. Now I know the price of a Thursday. I didn't understand yet how literal that sentence would turn out to be. But one person was missing from every photo, every call log, every excuse offered up so far. Where, in all of this, was my father? That question had a much longer answer than I could have guessed. Here's the thing about my dad. He would have crawled straight out of Singapore Harbor and swum home if he'd known, which is exactly why nobody let him know. I called his cell from Nora's phone on day 4. I've had that number memorized since middle school. Straight to voicemail. He swaps his SIM card for a local one every time he works overseas. The American number sleeps in a drawer for the whole 5 weeks. The plant site limits personal calls. The 13-hour time difference eats whatever's left. And everything, every piece of family news, funnels through exactly one person. My mother. Mission control. Keeper of the family news, and, it turned out, editor-in-chief of it too. On day 5, I borrowed Nora's tablet and wrote him an email, because a phone call I could not steady my voice through, and email is the only voice I fully trust when my hands are shaking. I kept it clinical, because clinical is the only register that doesn't crack. Dad, on Tuesday, a truck hit my car. My spleen ruptured. I had emergency surgery. 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, a concussion. I'm stable now. I've been alone here for 5 days. Call the hospital directly if you want to verify. I love you. I hit send at 9 at night, which was morning where he was, and fell asleep with the tablet propped against my pillow like a teenager waiting up for a text back. He called Nora's phone 11 hours later. I will hear the first sound he made for the rest of my life. Not a word. Just air going out of a man all at once, like something had been holding it in and finally let go. Then, Casey. Your mother told me it was a fender bender. A few bruises. She told me not to cut the trip short, that she had it handled. Handled. There was a long, strange quiet on the line while both of us did the exact same math, 13 time zones apart. She hadn't just failed to come. She had actively managed the story, built it, maintained it, updated it daily for 5 days like a press release. Before he hung up, my father said one more thing, very evenly, in a tone that scared me far more than shouting ever could have. Don't tell your mother I know. Let me look at her face when I walk in. By day 7, I was cleared to leave. That part surprises people, but it's actually routine. A week out from a splenectomy, if your labs behave, home is genuinely where you heal fastest. I was the easiest discharge that floor processed all month, mostly because I'd written half the plan myself out of pure occupational reflex. I couldn't manage the 2 flights of stairs to my own walk-up with 3 broken ribs, so Nora took me home to her first-floor apartment and her fold-out couch, which is, I've learned, how nurses say I love you when they don't have softer words for it. Before I left, I asked for 1 sheet of paper. I'm not a dramatic person by nature. I chart. I document. But some things need to be in writing, and I'd had an entire week flat on my back to choose exactly which lines mattered. I folded the paper once and set it on the pillow, dead center, exactly where a patient's head should have rested. Nora was at the nurse's station that afternoon, so what happened next comes secondhand, from her. Around 4 o'clock, my mother and Madison finally came down that hallway. 7 days after the first phone call. They came bearing flowers and a balloon dressed up like a magazine spread about forgiveness, because my father had called from his layover, and my mother needed a scene of family reunion fully staged before his plane touched down. They walked into an empty room. Madison checked the bathroom as if I might be hiding. My mother picked up the note, and Nora says she watched the color leave her face in real time, top to bottom, like someone had quietly opened a valve. Here's what the note said, word for word, because I still have the draft. Discharged myself. Don't worry, I've had a week of practice being alone. Tell Dad the truth for once. Too late, I already did. He lands at 6:40. See you at the wedding. Casey. If you've ever lain in a hospital bed counting footsteps in the hallway that never once turned into your door, tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And subscribe, because what my mother did after my father's plane touched down took even me by surprise, and I'm the one who wrote the note that set it in motion. My father didn't go home first. His plane landed at 6:40, and by 7:30 there was a rental car parked crooked in front of Nora's building and a 62-year-old engineer standing in her doorway with his suitcase still in his hand. He looked at the splint. At the bruises going yellow at the edges. At the careful way I was propped on pillows, because broken ribs make you choose between breathing and moving. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and hugged me the way you'd handle blown glass, and said, into the top of my head, "How's my girl?" And I fell apart in a way I hadn't let myself all week. He sat on the edge of the fold-out couch for an hour, still in his travel clothes. He wanted the timeline, so I gave it to him the way I'd give a shift change handoff report. The truck. The surgery. The 3 calls. The boutique. The vet. He flinched, physically, at the vet. Engineers live and die by data, and I watched him take each fact and set it down carefully, like parts of a machine he suspected was going to need a full rebuild. At some point, quietly, almost to himself, he said, "I believed her because it never crossed my mind not to." That sentence did more damage to me than the truck did, if I'm honest, because that's the whole marriage, right there, in 11 words. A man who tells the truth, assuming everyone around him is doing the same. He asked why I'd discharged myself before they arrived. I told him hospitals are for healing, and that room had stopped being useful for it days ago. He almost smiled at that. Then he stood, picked up his keys off the side table, and the warmth drained straight out of his face into something level and cold I had genuinely never seen on him in 31 years. "Get some sleep, Casey. I'm going home to ask your mother one question. I got the account of that night in pieces over the following days, mostly from my father, delivered in the same flat, careful register he uses for reading back instrument readings. He walked in with the suitcase still in his hand and asked his one question. Why did you tell me it was a fender bender? And my mother, I have to give her this, did not miss a single beat. She cried at exactly the correct volume. She explained that she hadn't wanted him to abandon the Singapore contract, that the completion bonus mattered enormously for their retirement, that doctors always make everything sound worse than it is. She'd been planning to bring me home to recover in my old bedroom the whole time. She had sheets in the dryer that very minute, she said, as if that settled it. It was a good performance, with exactly one flaw. It answered logistics, and he had asked about love. When he brought up tonight might be her last, she said hospitals say that for liability purposes. When he brought up 7 days, she said, Casey is so independent, you know how she gets, she makes it very hard to help her. Madison drifted in around then, added her entire contribution to my near-death experience in one sentence, Mom was a mess, Dad. Don't make it worse, and drifted back out again. My father moved into the guest room that night. What he did not do, not yet, was blow the house down. And honestly, I understood it. Decent people give the benefit of the doubt one last time. It's practically a tax on being decent. Besides, the whole county had already picked its priority. Aunts, neighbors, the ladies from St. Monica's, everyone hummed the same tune. 10 weeks to the wedding. Keep the family smooth for the wedding. Everyone, it seemed, was protecting the wedding. I started to wonder, lying on Nora's fold-out at 2 in the morning, what else that wedding might be protecting. Madison visited me exactly once during those first weeks. She stayed 15 minutes and brought a candle, the promotional kind her cosmetics company gives away free with orders over $50, the free gift sticker still on the shrink wrap. She sat on the arm of Nora's couch, scrolled her phone twice, and delivered her version of concern. You scared everyone, you know. And honestly, you kind of hijacked my engagement month. I want to be fair to my sister, so here's fairness, I don't think she heard how that sounded. In her weather system, she is the sun. Eclipses register as a personal insult. She asked if I was still up for being a bridesmaid, then eyed my splint and wondered whether it would come off before the photos, because gray wasn't in the palette. She asked me, please, not to make things weird with the relatives, because Mom was under so much stress right now. Then she left for a tasting. Nora watched the door close behind her and let the silence season for a moment. She's good at that, letting a thing sit until it says the quiet part on its own. Has she ever once, Nora asked, sat in a waiting room for you? I opened my mouth to defend my family and found the cupboard entirely bare, because I remembered a waiting room at Mercy West, years back. Madison's appendectomy. 24 years old and terrified. Somebody spent the whole night in a plastic chair, filled out her intake forms, translated everything the resident said into plain English, held her hand until the anesthesia pulled her under, and was still sitting there in the same chair when she woke up. That somebody was me. I was a 20-year-old nursing student with an exam that Friday morning, and it had never once occurred to me not to be there. That's not a virtue, by the way. I was starting to understand that it was a training program, and I'd been enrolled in it my entire life without ever being told. Recovery is boring, which is genuinely the nicest thing I can say about it. You walk your laps around somebody else's living room. You breathe into a plastic spirometer 10 times an hour so pneumonia doesn't find you. You learn precisely how many things a person cannot do with one hand in a splint, starting, humiliatingly, with a ponytail. By week 2, I had reorganized Nora's entire medicine cabinet, alphabetized her spice rack, and started laying her vitamins out next to the coffee maker every night, one-handed and stubborn about it. She came home from a night shift, looked at the little paper cup of vitamins, and took my laundry basket away from me the way you'd take car keys from someone who'd had too much to drink. You're auditioning again, she said. Sit down. You already have the part. It's called being my friend. I laughed, and then, embarrassingly, my eyes stung, because nobody had ever put it that plainly before. I'd been auditioning my entire life. Be useful. Be easy. Be no trouble. And maybe, eventually, this family will keep you. My job had just made the audition professional grade, with a license and a paycheck attached. That night, I sat up with my laptop and finally did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I scrolled through the old family photos my cousin had scanned into a shared album years ago. Birthdays, graduations, Easter after Easter after Easter. Once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. Madison, front and center in nearly every frame, my mother's arms wrapped around her like a seatbelt. My father off to one side, one hand resting on my shoulder. And me, edge of the frame, half-cropped or missing entirely, because I was the one who'd been holding the camera. 31 years of composition, and I had composed almost none of it myself. I kept asking the photos the same question I'd been asking the ceiling all week. What did I do wrong? Wrong question. The right one was sitting in my father's junk drawer, printed on 2 little laminated cards, patiently waiting for me to be ready to notice it. 6 weeks out, ribs mostly knitted, splint off, cleared to drive short distances, I accepted an invitation to dinner at my parents' house. I wasn't ready. I went anyway, because refusing forever isn't actually a plan. My mother cooked what she announced, with real pride, as my favorite. Chicken and dumplings. It was my favorite when I was 12. I've been vegetarianish for a decade, a fact she's been told at least 10 times and has never once retained, because retaining it would require actually looking at me. The table was staged like a photo shoot. Cloth napkins. The good candlesticks. Place cards for 5 people, with me seated exactly where the lighting best flattered the centerpiece rather than my own plate. My mother spoke almost entirely in the future tense, and every sentence was, in one way or another, about appearances. We'll put this whole awful spring behind us. It'll look so wonderful to have both my girls up there at the wedding. People have been asking about you, I've told them you're thriving. My father said almost nothing through the entire meal, watching her the way he reads a blueprint he already suspects has an error buried in it somewhere. Toward dessert, she reached across the table and squeezed my wrist, the recently fractured one, naturally, whether by accident or muscle memory I still can't say, and delivered the line she'd very clearly rehearsed in a mirror beforehand. Everything I did to keep this family whole. I said nothing. I was off the clock. I let the statement chart itself, the way you let a patient's own words sit in the record without correction, because sometimes the record speaks louder if you don't touch it. On my way out, I stopped in the study, because my dad had asked me to grab his reading glasses off the desk. The junk drawer was open an inch. Rubber bands. Passport. Donor pins. And 2 laminated blood donor cards sitting right on top, side by side, like they'd been left there for exactly this moment. David Rutledge, type O negative. Lorraine Rutledge, type O positive. I stood there holding his reading glasses, staring at those 2 cards a good deal longer than a person needs to stare at stationery. Something in the back of my skull had started, very quietly, to itch. That night I couldn't sleep, which I blamed on the ribs. That was a lie. I lay on Nora's fold-out running numbers, because that's what my brain does at 2 in the morning when it can't leave something alone. It charts. My blood type is a negative, I donate regularly, and 6 weeks earlier, 2 units of it had run back into my own arm with my own name on the paperwork. Dad, O negative, universal donor, 20-year pin, absurdly proud of it. Mom, a positive, per the laminated card sitting 12 hours old in my memory. Fine, O and A can make an A-negative daughter. Textbook. Then, unbidden, at 2:17 in the morning, came Madison. Mercy West, the appendectomy, the pre-op nurse reading her chart aloud while I held her hand. AB positive. I remembered it precisely, because Madison had turned it into a party fact she repeated for years. Universal recipient. My blood takes from everybody. It's very on brand. The room got extremely quiet. Here is the thing every nursing student learns in the very first week of pathophysiology, the kind of fact that gets etched in early and never leaves. Two parents, one type O, one type A, can produce an O child or an A child. That's the entire menu. Full stop. They cannot, not rarely, not unusually, cannot under any circumstance produce an AB child. The B has to come from somewhere. And there is no B allele anywhere in David or Lorraine Rutledge. I got up, ribs complaining the whole way, found the pad of yellow sticky notes Nora keeps by the phone, and wrote it out like an order I needed a second signature on before I'd trust it. O plus A is not equal to AB. I stuck it on the fridge and stood in the kitchen light in my socks, staring at 5 characters and a math symbol that were, very quietly, taking my entire family apart. Then I did what we do with a shocking lab value that seems too extreme to be real. I looked for the error. An engraving mistake. A mixed-up chart. Some 1 in a million phenotype I'd forgotten from a textbook footnote. Either that 15-year-old memory was wrong, or somebody in my house had been running a 35-year lie right under a family's nose. I verified it the way I'd verify a medication order that looked off, independent sources, no assumptions, no snooping in anyone's actual medical records, because I like my license and know exactly where the legal lines sit. My own type was the easy one, it's in my own patient portal, along with the transfusion record from the accident. A negative, confirmed. My father confirmed his own without ever knowing there was a question attached. I called to ask about his week and steered us toward the church blood drive, which takes 1 sentence with him before he's off and running. Universal donor, O negative, rarest of the common types, Casey, they call me first when supplies run low. I sat there with my eyes shut, listening to my sweet, oblivious father hand me the evidence himself, gift-wrapped in pride. My mother's card I had already seen twice with my own eyes, sitting in a drawer she'd never once think to hide, on top of years of matching donor pins from the very same church drives. A positive. And Madison's I didn't need paper for. I'd heard it read straight off her chart in a pre-op bay a decade ago, and then heard her repeat it, gleefully, at a dozen brunches and bachelorette parties since. Universal recipient. It's very on-brand. She was right, actually. My father's blood gives to anybody. My sister's blood takes from everybody. Biology, it turns out, has a genuinely dark sense of humor. I sat at Nora's kitchen table and drew out all 4 types in a square, parents on top, daughters underneath, exactly the way you'd sketch it for a genetics quiz. Me, possible. Madison, impossible. There was no version of this family, none, in which my sister was my father's daughter. 31 years of your sister needs us more, and it turned out that sentence had a genotype attached to it the whole time. I want to be honest about what that night felt like, because it wasn't triumph, not even close. I made it to the bathroom and lost my dinner, and only some of that was the pain medication. If the math was right, my father had spent 35 years building a life on top of drawings forged before he ever picked up a pencil. Every scene of my childhood res-hot itself in a new light while I sat on that bathroom floor at 3 in the morning. My mother at Madison's dance recitals with a camcorder held rock steady, and at my nursing pinning ceremony checking her watch before the applause even finished. The way she felt like something feral for Madison's spot on the cheer squad and forgot the date of my board exams. The trip to Disney World that happened entirely during the 1 week I was away at church camp, I used to run those memories looking for my own mistake. Some flaw in me that explained the temperature difference between how she loved us. There was never a flaw. There was a code, and I'd finally cracked it at 2 in the morning with a sticky note and a broken wrist. My mother had 2 daughters. One from a man she apparently loved. One from the marriage that paid the bills. I was the daughter of the marriage. Madison was the daughter of the love story. Every unfairness of 3 decades snapped into place around that single sentence like iron filings finding a magnet. But a blood type only tells you what's impossible. It doesn't tell you who, or when, or whether my father had ever once suspected, Or how a lie of that size gets serviced quietly for 35 years in a town small enough that everyone still waves at everyone else's mailman. For history, you don't need a lab. You need the person who remembers every wedding and every name that quietly got swallowed along the way. You need the family archivist. I texted my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, keeper of every photo box the family had ever produced, teller of careful, measured truths, and asked if I could come by. Her reply landed in under a minute. I wondered when you'd come. Aunt Carol's kitchen smells like percolator coffee and lemon oil, and it is, I've come to understand, exactly where this family keeps the truths it isn't ready to hang on a wall. She poured 2 cups, sat across from me, folded her hands on the table, and said one word. Ask. So I asked about 1990. It came out of her like something long rehearsed and never once performed out loud until now. My mother was 23 that year, working the counter at her own father's hardware store, and in love, the real kind, Carol said, the kind you could see from across a parking lot, with a smiling car salesman named Frank Delaney. Everybody assumed a ring was coming. What came instead was an heiress, the only daughter of a man who owned dealerships up and down the interstate. Frank did the math and married the inventory instead of the girl behind the counter. He was gone by June. 2 months later, my mother was suddenly, urgently engaged to David Rutledge, a quiet young engineer from St. Monica's who'd carried a torch for her since high school and couldn't believe his luck. They married that fall in a hurry the family explained away as romance. Madison arrived the following spring, 5 weeks early, according to the paper. Carol paused, cup halfway to her mouth. Casey, she was the biggest preemie that nursery ever saw. Your grandmother said as much once, out loud, at a christening, and never got invited to another one. Frank's wife passed away in 2006, no children. Frank Delaney came home and bought the local dealership, Delaney Motors, the one with the flags you've driven past 1,000 times without a second thought. Carol looked into her coffee for a long moment. About 15 years ago, she'd stopped at a rest area on Route 9 and seen her sister-in-law's scarf hanging in a Delaney Motors loaner, her sister-in-law laughing in the passenger seat beside a man who wasn't her husband. She'd told herself it wasn't her circus, and had been telling herself that ever since. I owed you this story sooner, she said. Then she slid a shoebox of old photographs across the table toward me. There's one in here your mother begged me to burn. I didn't. My mother has attended book club every Thursday evening for as long as I can remember. 20 solid years of Thursdays. And I have never once, not a single time, seen her actually carry a book to or from one of them. That's the kind of detail you simply don't examine when you're too busy auditioning for a part in your own family. The next Thursday, Nora drove, and we rolled slowly past the condominiums on the east shore of Mercer Lake, where, according to Carol, Frank Delaney had lived since coming back to town. I told myself we were just eliminating a possibility. Nurses double-check everything. And there it was. Third space from the entrance, under a security light that might as well have been a spotlight. My mother's champagne-colored Lexus, the one with the Delaney Motors vanity frame around the plate that I had genuinely never once thought about. Up in the second-floor window, a lamp burned warm and low, 2 silhouettes moving against the curtain. One tipped her head back the exact way my mother does when she laughs at something she wants a man to think is funnier than it is. I did not take a picture. I want that on the record. Whatever else I am not a woman who builds a dossier on her own mother. I sat in Nora's passenger seat for 10 quiet minutes, watching a lamp burn steady in a stranger's window, letting 20 years of Thursdays reorganize themselves into exactly what they had always, secretly, been. Then I said, okay. Drive. I didn't need evidence anymore. I needed to stop hoping. If you've ever watched a truth park itself under a streetlight and still, some stubborn part of you, wished you were wrong, leave a comment below. I read every single one. And subscribe, because my mother's very next move wasn't an apology at all. It was a checkbook. The summons came sweetly, the way they always do with her. Sunday dinner. Just us girls, her text said, with a little heart at the end. I went, because by then I'd started doing something I'd never done in that house before, observing instead of performing. It's remarkable what you notice the moment you stop trying to be seen. She'd made lemon chicken and talked wedding logistics for half an hour, flowers, the head table, whether the DJ could be trusted with the dance timing. Then, with the studied casualness of a woman merging onto a familiar highway, she got to the point. "I hear you visited your Aunt Carol." I said I had. "She's getting older, you know. She embroiders. Half her stories are other people's stories with the names quietly moved around. I'd hate for you to take some tale of hers to heart." I gave her the exact face I use for patients who tell me they definitely, absolutely haven't been skipping their medications. Pleasant. Neutral. Entirely unpersuaded. "She made good tea," I said. My mother studied me across the tablecloth for 3 long seconds, and I watched something cross her face that I had never once seen there before in 31 years. Uncertainty. She changed the subject to centerpieces immediately, but all through dessert, her thumb kept finding her wedding ring and turning it, around and around, like a lock she was quietly checking to make sure was still holding. I drove back to Nora's, 20 minutes, and I counted every red light along the way, replaying the whole conversation. She hadn't asked what Carol had told me. She'd asked whether I believed it. Those are 2 very different questions, and only one of them belongs to an innocent woman. 2 days later, at 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang at Nora's apartment. My mother stood on the step alone, lipstick perfect, holding a plain white envelope in both hands. I knew, before she opened her mouth, that whatever was inside wasn't a card. She came in, declined coffee, sat on the very edge of Nora's armchair, and slid the envelope across the coffee table with 2 fingers. Inside was a check for $20,000. Her voice went soft and maternal, a register I hadn't heard aimed at me since I ran a fever in 4th grade. "Mom knows this year has been too much for you. The accident, the stress, this is for a new car, and whatever the insurance didn't cover. We want you whole again, sweetheart. Healed before the wedding." I looked at the check. $20,000 is a real number. A whole car, replaced. She watched me look at it, then added the sentence she truly could not resist, the actual reason she'd driven over to deliver it in person. "And all this ancient history people are suddenly so interested in, my life before your father, my old friendships, that's grown woman business, Casey. Family peace is worth more than gossip. I need my girls beside me these next few weeks. Both of them." Smiling. There it was. Nobody in that room had said the name Frank Delaney out loud. Nobody had mentioned Thursdays, or blood types, or 1990. I hadn't accused her of a single thing. And here she was, negotiating terms like we were closing a business deal. You don't pay hush money for a rumor you believe is false. You pay it for one you know is true. I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, exactly what I was holding. An invoice with my name on it. A price tag for the same silence I'd been providing free for 31 years. I set my glass down, picked up the check, squared its edges, and slid it back across the table, face down. Her eyes followed it the whole way. "I read monitors for a living, Mom," I said. Quiet voice. Handoff report voice. "I know when the numbers are lying. And I know a payment when I see one." She started to speak, and I didn't raise my volume even one notch, because I'd learned that particular lesson directly from her. The devastating things, it turns out, land best when they're delivered calmly. For 31 years, I'd been applying for a position in this family. I brought coffee to the interview. I did the job for free, nights and weekends, holidays, everything. And every single year, the posting went to Madison. I finally know why. And it was never, ever going to be me, no matter what I did. I nudged the check another inch further toward her. "So thank you for the offer. I'm done applying." What happened to her face then is genuinely hard to describe unless you've watched a mask actually come off a person in real time. The maternal softness didn't fade slowly, it shut off completely, like a screen losing power all at once, and what sat across from me afterward was a stranger I'd technically known my entire life. When she spoke again, her voice had gone low and even and very, very precise. "Your father is a happy man. 35 years, a good home, a daughter getting married. If you take that away from him, Asia, my full name, the one she only ever pulls out like a blade, you won't be a hero. You'll just be the one who destroyed this family. Think about who they'll blame. Think hard." She stood, smoothed her skirt with two flat palms, and let herself out with her spine held perfectly straight, pausing on the way down the steps to compliment Nora, who was just arriving home with groceries, on her begonias. The check stayed on the coffee table, face down, one corner slowly lifting in the breeze from the closing door. Nora set down her bags, looked at me, and asked the only question that mattered anymore. "So, what monitor do we watch now?" And the only honest answer, was, my father's. That night, I finally went all the way through Aunt Carol's shoebox, and near the very bottom, in an envelope with softened, worn corners, I found the photograph my mother had once begged Carol to burn. October 1990. The bridal room at St. Monica's. My mother, 23, in her wedding dress, being fussed over by two aunts, and she is crying. Not happy tears. Her eyes are swollen, aimed at the middle distance. Standing behind her is my grandmother, mouth set like a staple, both hands clamped on the bride's shoulders in a way that isn't affection. It's containment. Carol had told me what her own mother reported hearing from the doorway that morning. "Wipe your face. He's a good provider." That was the entire pep talk delivered to a pregnant 23-year-old whose man had just married a car dealership instead of her. I sat with that photograph for a long time. I'm not going to tell you I forgave her, because I didn't. But for one night, at Nora's kitchen table near midnight, I could see the machine that had built her. A young woman handed exactly one exit and told that a ring was a roof, that appearances were oxygen, that you married the reliable man and kept the rest folded up small in a drawer. She took the exit that was offered. And then she spent 35 years making everyone around her quietly pay the toll for it. I was the daughter of the marriage, I told Nora, who'd brought over tea without being asked and didn't press me for anything else. Madison was the daughter of the love story. Mom kept the love story running and built the marriage on top of it like scaffolding. Understanding a thing and excusing it, I was learning, are two very different rooms in the same building. I stood firmly in the first one and kept the door to the second one shut and locked, and I intended to leave it that way. What I still hadn't decided, the thing I circled for days afterward, unable to land on an answer, was my father. And the following week, my father, without knowing it, decided for me. Saturday. My parents' backyard, a month before the wedding. My father stood at the grill in the apron Madison had bought him years earlier, world's okayest chef, flipping burgers while Madison, barefoot in the grass, made him practice the father-daughter dance off a phone speaker. He counted his steps out loud, apologizing to her feet every time he missed one, and she laughed and told him head back, Dad, and he glowed like the coals under the grill grate. I stood at the picnic table holding a bowl of potato salad, watching the happiest man I know slow dance on a floor that, at that point, I alone could see wasn't really there. That's not entirely true. My mother could see it too. She watched from the kitchen window, and when her eyes met mine through the glass, she smiled and raised her iced tea half an inch. A toast, between colleagues. That's precisely what my silence had made us. That night, on Nora's couch, I finally laid it all out loud, both roads, side by side. Tell him, and I detonate the family, the wedding, his 35 years, maybe even his health at his age, and hand my mother exactly the story she'd already pre-drafted, the one where I'm the bitter daughter who burned it all down over a grudge nobody else could even see. Or stay quiet, and he stays happy. Isn't that worth one shut mouth? Isn't that, in its own strange way, actually mercy? Nora listened all the way through without interrupting once, and then asked one single question, in the exact tone she uses when she's teaching new grads something they'll need for the rest of their careers. On your floor, does a patient have the right to their own diagnosis? Even the bad ones. Even when the family says don't tell him, it'll only upset him? Yes, I said. Obviously, yes. Legally, ethically, yes. It's his body, his life, his choices to make. She nodded, slow and deliberate. Then explain to me why your father is the exception. I was still sitting with that question, turning it over, when my phone buzzed against the armrest. Dad, fishing Saturday, Mercer Lake, sunrise. Just my girl and me. He picked me up Thursday to buy bait and tackle for the weekend, because in my family, preparing for the fishing has always been treated as half the fishing itself. In the truck, his hand drummed a happy rhythm on the wheel. He was lighter than I'd seen him since before Singapore. At a red light, he told me why, in the shy voice he only uses for generosity. He'd paid off the entire remaining balance on the wedding venue that morning, as a surprise for Madison and Trevor. Then he'd gone by the credit union about pulling a slice of his retirement savings early, because there was one more surprise. He'd left a deposit at St. Monica's for their 35th anniversary, 2 months after the wedding. A full vow renewal. Same church, same altar, same everything. Your mother deserves to get married twice, he said, and smiled out at the windshield, genuinely pleased with himself, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor of the truck. I looked out the passenger window and did the arithmetic I do best. Dosage and time. His pension, quietly draining into a wedding for the daughter of the man living on Mercer Lake. His voice, about to say vows all over again to a woman with a standing Thursday appointment across town. And me, sitting on the truth the entire time, telling myself my silence was somehow protecting him. It landed on me at that red light with an almost physical weight, heavier than anything the truck accident had left behind. That's her sentence. I hadn't wanted to worry you. I did it to keep this family whole. Silence, dressed up as protection, protecting absolutely nobody but the person staying silent. Stay quiet one more month, and I wasn't her victim anymore. I was her apprentice. The light turned green. Sunrise Saturday, my dad said, easing back into traffic. I'll bring the thermos. 5 days. I had 5 days, and one speech I realized, somewhere in that truck, I'd been quietly writing my entire life without ever knowing it. Friday night, I sat at Nora's kitchen table and prepared, because preparation is how I hold my own hand still. My first draft looked exactly like a case file. Print the timeline. List the blood types in a clean chart. Pull the wedding announcement from the newspaper archive, the birth date doing its quiet math underneath. I got halfway through before I saw what I was actually building. A prosecution. I've stood in enough rooms where a person's world got taken apart to know it's never done with a binder shoved across a table. When we deliver the worst news on my floor, we sit down. We say the true thing in plain words. We stay in the chair while it lands. We answer every question. We don't flinch, and we don't leave. The facts should be checkable, that matters. But the moment has to be human, or it isn't care at all, just paperwork with worse timing. So this is what I decided to bring to Mercer Lake. Myself. The truth, in order. And one sentence at the end, ask me anything, and I'll answer. No folder. No photographs of a lamp in a window, because there were none, and there never would be. I took the yellow sticky note off Nora's refrigerator, O plus A is not equal to AB, starting to curl gently at the edges by then, folded it, and put it in my wallet. Not to show him. To remind myself, in case my nerve went, that this was a diagnosis, not a weapon. I'm done applying, I told the kitchen window, quietly, the same way I'd told my mother across her coffee table. This isn't an application anymore. Then I set 2 alarms, and I didn't need either one. Mercer Lake at sunrise is the kind of quiet that has texture. Mist standing on the flat water. The dock boards ticking as they warm. My father backed the truck in, handed me the thermos, and set up 2 folding chairs with the same unhurried ceremony he brings to anything that matters to him. For a long while we just fished, which in our family mostly means drinking coffee and watching a bobber do nothing. He told the story he always tells here, me, at 9, hauling in the biggest bass either of us had ever seen, then crying until he released it because it probably had a family. "You apologized to the fish," he said, wheezing with laughter. 9 years old and already doing rounds. The mist moved. The coffee went down. I sat there with the truth held in my chest like a breath I'd been carrying for weeks, watching the light come up over the East Shore, where a champagne Lexus had spent 20 years' worth of Thursday evenings. I'd planned a gentle opening. I never got to use a single word of it. My father reeled in slow, set his rod across both knees, and looked over at me the way he looks at a machine making a sound only he can hear. "Casey," he said. "You've been carrying something since the hospital. I watched you carry it at dinner, in the truck on Thursday, and you're carrying it right now, and it's bending you." He turned his chair to face mine. The dock creaked. And my father, the last genuinely innocent man in this story, said, simply, "Set it down." So I set it down. All of it, the way I was trained to deliver news that divides a life into before and after. Plain words. Short sentences. Nearest truth first. I started with the accident, because he already held half of it. Dad, the fender bender story wasn't a mix-up. Mom knew the very first night. She got 3 calls. She was told I might not live. And she said her sister needs us more right now. Then she went dress shopping. Then she managed the story so you'd stay away. His jaw set, hard, but he nodded. This part he'd already assembled himself, alone in the guest room. Then the middle truth. I took out my phone and showed him nothing on it. I just talked. "You're O negative, you've told me that 100 times. Mom's card says a positive. I'm a negative, that all works." I took a breath. Madison is AB positive. I was in her pre-op room at Mercy West. I heard it off her chart. You've heard her joke about it, universal recipient. I watched my engineer father run the problem in real time, because blood inheritance is just logic gates, and building logic gates had been his career for 30 years. O gives O. A gives A, or O. I watched him reach for AB allele somewhere in the family tree and find the cupboard empty. I said the sentence out loud anyway, because he deserved not to be alone with it. 2 parents with O and A can't make AB, Dad. There's no version of the biology where Madison is yours. And then the far truth, all of it in order. 1990, a car salesman named Frank Delaney who married a dealership instead of the girl behind the hardware store counter. A wedding arranged in 2 months. A 9-pound baby announced as 5 weeks early. Frank, widowed, back in town since 2006. 20 years of book club that never once produced an actual book. A champagne Lexus that parks, regular as clockwork, on the east shore of this exact lake. "I'm not asking you to believe me," I said. "Ask me anything. Check every piece of it. I'll sit here as long as it takes." Then I did the only other thing I know how to do at a bedside when the news is this bad. I put my hand over his hand, and I stayed. The bobbers drifted, forgotten. His jaw ticked slow and steady, like its own kind of monitor. He was quiet for the longest 20 minutes of my life. He went through it the way strong men do, in stages. First denial, barely a full sentence, "Your mother wouldn't," which collapsed under its own weight, because he'd already watched her lie to him about my surgery with a straight face. Then the engineering took over. He muttered the logic gates to himself, hunting for the loophole. There is no loophole. I watched the moment he accepted it, because his shoulders moved the way shoulders move when something heavy gets set on them for keeps. Then the anger, which lasted less time than I'd braced for, and wasn't aimed where I'd feared. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading most. "How long have you known?" I told him. "Weeks." And I told him why I'd waited, the wedding, his heart, the ready-made story my mother had waiting in reserve where I'm the one who burns it all down. He listened to every word. Then, quietly, why tell me now, when it would have been so much easier forever not to? The answer came out of me from somewhere older than the accident. Because I spent 31 years trying to be useful enough to be loved, Dad. I nearly died still auditioning. I'm done. You deserved a real marriage, not a maintenance contract. And I deserved to be somebody's daughter, not just the family's on-call nurse. My father looked at me for a long moment. And then my father cried, the way men cry who were never taught how, briefly, furiously, like weather passing through. When it passed, he picked his rod back up, cast it out, and told me his decision with the lake carrying his voice. I raised Madison. Taught her to drive. Sat up with her when she had the croup. 35 years. That part of my life was never a lie. She was never the lie. Cast, drift. Your mother was. He would walk Madison down the aisle, he said, because a father is the man who shows up, and he had 35 years of showing up that no blood test could repossess. And on the Monday after the wedding, he was going to see a lawyer. What he said to me next I will keep for the rest of my life. You're the only one who told me the truth in my own house, Casey. That makes you the easy part of all this. You were always the easy part. I wasn't there for what happened that night, by design, his and mine both. This part he told me later, with the flat calm of a man reading back a flight recorder. He came home, set his keys on the counter, and said one sentence. Tell me about Thursdays, Lorraine. No folder. No accusations. Just a schedule, spoken out loud. She tried the usual stations. Surprise. Offense. Tears. Then, when none of that caught, negotiation, where she truly lives. And then she made the one mistake 35 years of managing everyone had never taught her not to make. She reached for her handler's tools in front of a man who'd permanently stopped being handled. She called Frank Delaney on speaker, right there in the kitchen. To prove it was nothing, she said. Frank will tell you himself, David. Frank answered on the second ring, in a voice my father said he'd hear forever after, low, comfortable, shoes off. Hey, you. Silence. Then my mother, brittle now. Frank. David is standing right here. Tell him it's. Frank Delaney, presented for the second time in his life with a choice between Lorraine and his own comfort, chose exactly what he'd chosen once before, in 1990. Whoa. Don't drag me into your marriage, Lorraine. I have a family. Click. Dial tone, in a very quiet kitchen. My father told me later he almost felt sorry for her, watching her hold a dead phone against her ear. Almost. He slept in the guest room that night, door locked. 2 weeks later, Madison's wedding went off flawlessly. White aisle runner, string quartet, 400 roses. My father walked her down that aisle with his back straight and his eyes visibly wet, and everyone assumed ordinary sentiment. Only 3 people in that church knew it was also, quietly, a goodbye. My mother wore the smile straight out of the old photographs, layered a little thicker. I sat in the back row and was, for the last time in my life, no trouble at all. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. His lawyer filed. Here is what 6 months of consequences look like when nobody has to scream to get there. The house sold as part of the divorce. My mother moved into a 2-bedroom apartment next to the laundromat on 5th, where the dryers thumped through the wall like a slow heartbeat. She called Frank, finally ready to be chosen out loud. Frank sold the dealership that winter and moved to Florida with a woman named Bobby. The ladies of St. Monica's never said one unkind word. They simply stopped calling her to chair anything, which in that world is its own exile. And Madison. My father told her the truth himself, gently, after the honeymoon. She called me first, incandescent. I knew before my wedding. I let her walk me down that aisle on a lie. Who do you even think you are? Then she went quiet for months, and her silence spread, unexpectedly, to cover our mother too. Madison had been raised to follow the picture in front of her, and there was no picture left on that side of the family anymore. Just an apartment beside a laundromat, and a story nobody wanted in the album. No thunderbolts. No courtroom scenes out of a movie. Just invoices, 35 years worth of them, finally mailed to the correct address after all this time. My father bought a small blue house 2 streets up from Mercer Lake, close enough to walk his morning coffee down to the water. Sundays are pancakes now. He cooks. I sit at the counter and let him, which for me is still the harder skill. Some weeks I still reach for the spatula, and he points it at me like a teacher with a ruler, and we laugh about it every time. I took a job at an outpatient clinic. 8-hour shifts, no more nights. My license intact, and, for the first time in my adult life, my boundaries intact right along with it. I still drive through Route 9 and Callahan most days. The light was green the day of the crash, and it's usually green now too, and I still count to 3 before I roll through it, out of a habit I don't think will ever fully leave. In the spring, a text arrived from a number I hadn't seen in months. Madison. 2 lines. I did a blood test. Thank you for not telling me before the wedding. I typed and deleted a response for a while. Then I sent back the only thing that was actually true and mine to offer. Whenever you're ready, I'll show up. Almost a year after the accident, I went back to St. Bridget as a patient one more time, a scheduled repair of a small hernia at my old surgical scar. Routine day surgery. But routine still comes with paperwork, and paperwork still has that one line. Emergency contact. I had filled in the same name on that line since I was 18, the way you recite something memorized before you understood it. This time I printed it in block letters clean enough that a pharmacist could love. David Rutledge. Father. When I surfaced in recovery, groggy and stupid in a paper gown, there was a man asleep, sitting bolt upright in the world's least comfortable chair, a fishing magazine open on his chest, and on the little table beside him, a bunch of daisies from the gas station on Route 9, price sticker still on the cellophane. Nobody had called him with bad news that day. No crisis. No surgeon. No, tonight might be her last. Nobody needed him there, technically, for any medical reason at all. He came anyway. I lay there letting the monitor quietly count my heartbeat for me, watching him sleep sitting up in that terrible chair, and I finally understood the whole difference between blood and family. One is just a type, printed on a laminated card in a junk drawer. The other one shows up, unasked, with grocery store flowers, and falls asleep waiting for you to wake up. If I've learned one single thing worth passing on from all of this, it's this. Family was never the people who happen to match your blood type. It's the people who show up before you're even awake to notice. And you are allowed, fully, completely allowed, to stop auditioning for anyone who doesn't. That's my story. 3 phone calls. 1 empty bed. 1 note that turned my mother's face white in a hospital hallway. And 1 father who was worth the truth, every hard word of it. If you've ever been the one who always shows up for everyone else, take this as your sign to start saving your showing up for the people who would do it back for you. Share this video with someone who's ever sat alone in a waiting room. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.